he will curse you to your face. The prologue tells us the story of a sound and honest man, or man of integrity and honesty, who feared God and shunned evil. At the same time, he possessed great material wealth. He was not a member of the Jewish people, but a native of the land of Uz, which may have been part of Edom. This geographical location is further suggested by the names given to the friends of Job, for they refer to places in the same region. The author wants to give his story a universal appeal that transcends national boundaries. As a matter of fact, the book does not explicitly mention either the chosen people or the covenant. The atmosphere is that of a patriarchal age, before the rise of Israel as a nation. At the outset, the author notes the importance Job attributed to talk about God. In his concern for his sons, who were accustomed to giving frequent banquets, he would rise at dawn after such a banquet and make a burnt offering for each of them. Perhaps, Job would say, "My sons have sinned, and in their hearts blasphemed." 1:5. The question of speaking ill and speaking well of God is thus a central one in the book. The first scene unfolded on earth. The second now takes place in the heavenly court, as the Satan makes his first wager. The angels who are God's messengers appear before him. Among them, oddly enough, is the Satan who has just been prowling about on earth. 1:7. Yahweh proudly tells the Satan how satisfied he is with the fidelity of Job. "Did you pay any attention to my servant Job? There was no one like him on the earth." He then repeats what we have already been told about Job, that he is a man of integrity and honesty, a man who fears God and shuns evil. 1:8. The terms are the same as before. The word I translate as man of integrity is the Hebrew tam, a term with a rich and complex meaning on which it will be worth dwelling briefly. Tam means innocent, but with a connotation of personal integrity, of something finished, complete, perfect, and therefore exemplary. Whence it also conveys the meaning just. Job's integrity will be acknowledged on several occasions. See, for instance, 2:3 and 2:9. And he himself will use the word tam, or its plural, tamim, in proclaiming his innocence. See 9:20-21, 12:4, 27:5, 31:6. In addition to being called a man of integrity, a description that emphasizes the internal coherence of his personality, Job is also said to be honest, yashar. This new adjective indicates his acceptance of ethical norms. Job is one who practices justice in his social life. If we add to this twofold characterization the second part of the sentence, who fears God and shuns evil, we have a description of Job's innocence in relation to God and to his fellow human beings. The narrator states this innocence in V1, and God asserts it authoritatively in V8. The poet thus calls our attention to the integrity of Job from the opening lines of his book. The Satan then issues his challenges. Yes, but Job is not God-fearing for nothing, is he? Have you not put a wall around him and his house and all his domain? You have blessed all he undertakes, and his flocks throng the countryside. But stretch out your hand and lay a finger on his possessions, then I warrant you he will curse you to your face. 1:9-11. The challenge contains a point that is a key to the book of Job. The text has to be read and analyzed carefully. Otherwise, the deeper meaning of the book will elude us. It is impossible for the Satan to deny that Job is a good and devout man. What he questions is rather the disinterestedness of Job's service of God, his lack of concern for a reward. The Satan objects not to Job's works, but to their motivation. Job's behavior, he says, is not for nothing. In Hebrew, hinam. In the Satan's view, a religious attitude can be explained only by expectation of a reward. We will shortly learn that this is also the view of Job's friends. If, however, Job be regarded as a truly just man, then, even though there be no other like him in the land, the lie is given to this view of religion. The innocence of Job makes it historically possible that there may be other innocent human beings. The injustice of his suffering points to the possibility that other human beings may also suffer unjustly. In his disinterested outlook points to the possibility that others too may practice a disinterested religion. Here we have the potential universality of the figure of Job. It is, in fact, clear that the poet intends to make a paradigm of him. The Satan, the obstacle, wishes to bar the way to this possibility, which implies the loving and complete free meeting of two freedoms, the divine and the human. It is this that gives the connection religion between the human person and God its fullest meaning as a disinterested self-surrender instead of a manipulation of the Lord to a human being's advantage. With this in mind, the Satan proposes his wager. Lay a finger on his possessions, then I warrant you he will curse you to your face. Thus, the central question of the book of Job is raised at the outset. The role that reward or disinterestedness plays in faith in God and in its consistent implementation. God believes that Job's uprightness is disinterested, and he therefore accepts the challenge. The author is telling us in this way that a utilitarian religion lacks depth and authenticity. In addition, it has something satanic about it. This is the first appearance of the irony that the author handles so skillfully. The expectation of rewards that is at the heart of the doctrine of retribution vitiates the entire relationship and plays the demonic role of obstacle on the way to God. In self-seeking religion, there is no true encounter with God, but rather the construction of an idol. When the friends of Job speak later on of rewards for those who reverence God, for instance, Eve 5-7, 11:13-19, we will already know what to think. To believe for nothing, without payment, is the contrary of a faith based on the doctrine of retribution. This point will be bitterly debated in the subsequent dialogues. The relationship between retribution and disinterestedness is therefore a theme that connects the prose section with the poetic section more closely than many interpreters think. This point will emerge with full clarity when I analyze the final discourses of God. To put the matter quite concretely, the wager has to do with speaking of God in the light of the unjust suffering that seems, in human experience, to deny love on God's part. The terms and outcome of the challenge are given in the two narrative parts, thus enabling us to understand what is the issue in the language used of God in the poetic section. As I said above, God accepts the Satan's challenge because God trusts in Job. God says to the Satan, all he has is in your power, but keep your hands off his person. 1:12. At this point in the story, the scene changes again, and we find ourselves once more on the earth. Job receives news of the deaths of his sons and daughters, and the loss of his possessions. 1:13-19. Nonetheless, says the narrator, Job committed no sin, and he did not reproach God. 1:22. Yahweh is winning the bet. After the enemy's first failure, God openly proclaims the innocence of Job amid his sufferings. He says to the Satan, he persists in his integrity still. You achieve nothing by provoking me to ruin him. 2:3. The innocence on which Job himself will insist so strongly later on is acknowledged by the Lord himself from the beginning of the book. We readers are fully informed of it. Furthermore, despite having been stricken in his possessions and his loved ones, Job persists in his integrity still. Therefore, his faith and behavior are disinterested, for nothing. This is the point the author wishes to emphasize, because in his view, disinterested religion alone is the true religion. But the Satan does not back down. He returns to the attack and challenges God once more. The earlier test was insufficient because, says the enemy, skin after skin, someone will give away all he has to save his life. But stretch out your hand and lay a finger on his bone and flesh. I warrant you he will curse you to your face. 2:5. Injury that touched only his family and his possessions was not enough to make Job speak ill of God. Now there is question of wounding him in his own body. The enemy continues to think that Job's piety and justice are not disinterested, that the reason he behaves as he does is the material rewards he has received, that his actions are not truly free and disinterested. The Satan therefore feels more confident that this time, when he is able to attack the very person of Job, he will win the match. This is the last of the scenes in the heavenly court. Henceforth everything, including the final revelation of God, will take place on earth. Job falls ill. Afflicted with malignant ulcers from the sole of his foot to the top of his head, he sits among the ashes. 7-8. He is henceforth a sick as well as a poor man. To the death that is at work in his flesh, there is added social death. For in the opinion of that time, persons suffering from incurable illnesses were to some extent outcasts from society. A factor contributing to this attitude was the conviction that poverty and sickness were a punishment for the sins of the individual or the family. In the eyes of his contemporaries, therefore, Job is a sinner, and because he had been a rich and important person, a great sinner. As a result, he is isolated and profoundly alone. He gives dramatic expression to his situation by making a place for himself outside the town on a garbage heap or dunghill. There, shortly afterward, he will voice his complaint and his lament. In view of this new calamity that has befallen Job, his wife, who was also affected by his misfortune and shares his unjust suffering, urges him to curse God. Why persist in this integrity of yours? Curse God and die. 2:9. The issue here is literally the integrity to which I have referred. What his wife challenges is Job's stubborn maintenance of his interior consistency and exemplary conduct. Adversity does not cause him to lose his innocence. The author wants it clear that Job's perseverance in his religious outlook is a further expression of his disinterestedness, and so he pictures Job responding to his wife. That is how a fool of a woman, Nabal, talks. 2:10. The Bible describes as foolish or stupid those who deny God. That is what the psalmist says. The fool thinks there is no God. 14:1.